3 days after her husband's body washed downstream, Mercy Whitfield still scrubbed blood from her apron, unaware someone on the riverbank already knew her secret. The church bell struck 9 when Mercy Whitfield heard the splash. She pressed her back against the cottonwood, clutching the blood-stained apron to her chest. Footsteps crunched through river stones. A shadow fell across the muddy bank where her husband's body had floated 3 days past. "Count the cost, Senora." The voice came low, unhurried. Her breath caught. She knew that voice, the Apache scout who rode with the cavalry, who brought word when settlers went missing. She'd seen him at the trading post, his blue coat mocking him as government man. The coat hit the ground with a soft thud. 10 minutes earlier, Mercy had knelt by the water's edge, scrubbing Thomas's blood from her good apron. The creek ran muddy from yesterday's storm, but she could see her reflection wavering in the shallow's wild hair, hollow cheeks, the purple bruise still darkening her jaw. "Should have left him to the buzzards," she whispered, then crossed herself quick. "The preacher said Thomas drowned drunk." The sheriff nodded and closed his ledger. But Mercy knew the truth. Lived in her hands. The iron poker she'd swung. The sickening crack when it met his skull. The way he'd stumbled backward off the porch, into the creek. Self-defense, her mind argued. 3 years of fists and worse. But the law wouldn't see it that way. Not for a woman who'd married a man sight unseen come west on the promise of a fresh start that turned to nightmare the day she stepped off the stage. She dipped the apron again. Pink water swirled away downstream. Washing won't change what happened. Mercy spun toward the voice. The Apache scout sat his horse at the creek's bend, close enough to read her guilt. His blue cavalry coat caught morning light, brass buttons catching the sun like cold eyes. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her voice cracked. He swung down from his mount, ground-tied the reins. 3 days ago, you told Sheriff Morrison your husband went out drinking. Never came home." "That's right. But Thomas Whitfield was in your kitchen when he died. I saw the blood on your porch boards before you scrubbed them." Mercy's knees gave way. She sank into the creek bank, muddy water soaking through her skirt. "He was going to kill me. I swear before God, he was going to kill me this time." The scout stood silent, studying her face. His own features were weathered copper, unreadable as stone. "My name is Joaquin Santos. The army calls me Joe." She nodded, not trusting words. "I track for Colonel Hayes. Read sign. Find lost things." He crouched beside her, close enough that she caught his scent leather and sage smoke. "Sometimes I find things that need to stay lost." Hope fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. "What do you want?" "The truth. Then we decide what comes next." Mercy looked at her hands, red raw from scrubbing, calloused from 3 years of frontier labor. "He drank up our savings, beat me when I complained. Last week he sold my mother's wedding ring for whiskey money." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Tuesday night he came home meaner than usual. Said he'd found a buyer for the homestead. Planned to take the money and leave me with nothing. So you stopped him." "I hit him with a poker when he grabbed for me. He fell backward, struck his head on the porch rail. I thought I hoped he was just stunned, but when I checked, he wasn't breathing." Joaquin nodded slowly. "Then you dragged him to the creek." "I couldn't think straight. Just knew they'd hang me if they found him in my kitchen." Tears leaked down her cheeks. "I never meant to kill him." The scout stood, walked to where his coat lay crumpled on the bank. He shook it out, studied the blue wool like a man reading prophecy in cloth. "Colonel Hayes wants me to track a band of mescalero who jumped the reservation. Dangerous work. I could use a good cook, someone to tend camp." He folded the coat careful-like, tucked it under his arm. "Army pays $2 a day plus found." Mercy stared at him. "You're offering me work?" "I'm offering you a chance to disappear for a while. Let this business with your husband settle into memory." He caught her gaze, held it steady. "But first we clean up loose ends." "I don't understand." "Your husband's body will wash up downstream in a day or 2. Sheriff Morrison will rule it accidental drowning, like he planned. But someone needs to grieve proper, sell the homestead, leave town with dignity intact." "How?" Joaquin's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. Thomas Whitfield's widow decides she can't bear to stay where everything reminds her of loss. She sells to the banker for cash money, tells folks she's going to live with her sister in California. Very sad, very respectable. Mercy felt something hard and cold in her chest begin to thaw. And then Mercy Whitfield gets on the eastbound stage, very publicly. But a woman named Maria Santos meets my scouting party 20 miles south of town. My cousin from Tucson come to help with camp work while we hunt renegades. The plan settled over her like a warm blanket. Simple, clean, possible. Why would you do this for me? Joaquin was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice carried weight like stones sinking in deep water. My first wife died from her husband's fists. Pueblo man, mean drunk. I was young, fear made me polite between married folks. Watched her grow thin and quiet, bruises always fresh. He stared at the muddy creek. Found her in the river one morning. He claimed she fell, and I said nothing. Understanding passed between them, like heat over desert rock seen only when the air bends. I won't let another woman die while I do nothing. He turned back to her. But if we do this thing, you follow my rules. No questions, no looking back. Can you manage that? Mercy thought of 3 years spent walking careful, measuring words, hiding bruises under long sleeves. She thought of the relief that flooded through her when Thomas's eyes went empty, the terrible gratitude for silence in her own kitchen. I can manage. Joaquin nodded. Good. Now listen close. Here's what happens next. By noon the church bell had rung 12 times, and half the town knew Thomas Whitfield's body had washed up near Miller's Crossing. Sheriff Morrison pronounced it accidental death by drowning, noting the victim's well-known fondness for liquor. Mrs. Whitfield, overcome with grief, had taken to her bed. Mercy played the grieving widow with skill born of desperation. She received mourners with red-rimmed eyes and shaking hands, accepted casseroles and condolences with appropriate tears. When banker Cornelius Webb offered to buy the homestead for $800 a fair price, he assured her, though she knew it was worth twice that she accepted with trembling gratitude. I cannot bear to stay, she told the women's auxiliary. Everything here reminds me of my dear Thomas. They nodded with sympathy, understanding the plight of a woman alone on the frontier. Mrs. Abernathy from the general store pressed a jar of preserves into her hands. For your journey, dear. You're wise to return to family. 3 days after the funeral, Mercy Whitfield climbed aboard the eastbound stage with a single carpet-bag and a one-way ticket to Denver. Half the town gathered to see her off, whispering prayers for the young widow's safe travels. What they didn't see was the woman who slipped off the stage at the first water stop, walking south through scrub oak toward a line of low hills, or the Apache scout who waited there with a spare horse and supplies for a 2-week journey into country where the army still fought running battles with ghosts. The scouting party consisted of 6 men: Joaquin, 2 other Apache scouts named Charlie and Ben, a Buffalo Soldier sergeant called Washington, and 2 white corporals who treated Maria Santos with careful politeness. She cooked over open fires, tended wounds, learned to read weather in cloud patterns and grass movement. For the first time in 3 years, Mercy slept without listening for footsteps on the porch. They tracked the Mescalero band through broken country south of the Gila, following cold camps and scattered horse sign. The work was hard, dangerous, but it carried a strange kind of peace. Out here she was simply Maria, a woman who could handle herself, who knew the value of silence, who asked no favors and expected no protection beyond what she earned. Joaquin treated her with distant respect, but sometimes she caught him watching her with something warmer than professional interest. When she burned her hand on the coffee pot, he tended the wound with gentle fingers. When rattlesnakes spooked the horses one evening, he placed himself between the sound and where she slept. "You're good at this," he told her one night, as she cleaned his rifle by firelight. "Living rough, I mean. Most town women couldn't manage. Most town women haven't spent 3 years walking on eggshells. She worked oil into the gunmetal with careful strokes. This feels easy by comparison. Even the danger?" Mercy considered that. They'd found sign of the Mescalero band that afternoon, recent tracks, still warm ashes. Tomorrow they'd likely make contact, and contact might mean fighting. "Especially the danger," she said finally. "At least now I can see it coming." They caught up to the renegades at dawn on the 8th day, in a box canyon 20 miles from the Mexican border. The confrontation was brief, violent, and decisive. When the smoke cleared, 3 Mescalero warriors lay dead, and the rest had melted back into the desert like morning mist. Sergeant Washington took a bullet through the shoulder. One of the corporals, young Miller from Ohio, caught an arrow in his leg that snapped off when he fell. Mercy worked over both men with steady hands while Joaquin and the other scouts secured the canyon. "You ever tend gunshot wounds before?" Washington asked through gritted teeth as she dug for the bullet. "No," Mercy admitted, probing carefully with her knife point. "But I've cleaned plenty of other messes. Hold still." The bullet came free with a wet pop. Washington sagged with relief as she packed the wound with clean cloth. "You got good hands for this work," he said. "Steady." Mercy tied off the bandage, moved to examine Miller's leg. The arrow had punched through muscle, missing bone but leaving a ragged wound that bled freely. "Can you get it out?" Miller's face was white with pain. "I can try." She looked up at Joaquin, who'd appeared at her elbow. "But we need to get him to a real doctor soon. Fort Craig's 30 miles north. We can make it in 2 days if we push hard." Mercy nodded, went back to work. As she cleaned Miller's wound, her hands moved with confidence she didn't know she possessed. 3 years of marriage to Thomas had taught her about broken skin, about hiding damage, about enduring pain. Now those hard lessons served a better purpose. They reached Fort Craig as the sun touched the western mountains. The post surgeon, a tired man named Holcomb, who smelled of carbolic and whiskey, examined Mercy's work with professional interest. "Clean wounds, proper field dressing," he told Colonel Hayes. "Your camp cook knows her business." Hayes studied Mercy with sharp blue eyes. "Santos tells me you're his cousin from Tucson. Planning to stay with the scouting parties?" Mercy felt the weight of decision pressing down like summer heat. She could return to civilian life, find work in town, build something like a normal existence. Or she could stay with this strange company of soldiers and scouts, living rough but free, in country that asked no questions about a woman's past. She met the colonel's gaze steadily. "If you'll have me, sir. I find I have a taste for the work." Hayes nodded. "Good. We need people who can handle themselves out there." He turned to Joaquin. "Santos, your scouting contract comes up for renewal next month. Still planning to re-enlist?" "Yes, sir. And you'll want to keep your cousin with you?" "If she's willing." Mercy felt something settle in her chest like a key turning in a well-oiled lock. "I'm willing." That evening she and Joaquin walked the fort's perimeter as the sun painted the mountains red. They'd spoken little during the journey back, but now silence felt comfortable rather than cautious. "You don't have to stay," he said finally. "I can arrange passage to California or back east. Give you money to start fresh, somewhere safe." "I don't want safe anymore." Mercy stopped walking, turned to face him. "Safe was Thomas's promise when I answered his letter. Safe was staying quiet when he hit me, hoping he'd drink himself to death before he killed me." Joaquin's expression was unreadable in the fading light. "This life isn't easy. Always moving, always watching for trouble. No real home, no settled future. No one asking questions about where I came from or who I used to be." That too. They walked on in comfortable quiet. The fort's evening routine played out around them. Soldiers grooming horses, cooks preparing supper, the steady rhythm of garrison life that felt somehow more peaceful than any parlor she'd ever known. "There's something you should know," Joaquin said as they reached the gate. "About my offer back at the creek." Mercy's heart stumbled. "What about it?" "It wasn't entirely selfless." He stopped, faced her fully. "I've been watching you for months, since before Thomas died. Saw the bruises you tried to hide, the way you flinched when men raised their voices. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. So when you found me by the river, I'd been tracking Thomas for 2 days. He'd stolen horses from the Apache reservation, and Colonel Hayes wanted him brought in. When I found his body in the creek, I figured justice had been served one way or another." Mercy absorbed this revelation slowly. "You could have turned me in." I could have done many things." His voice grew quiet. "But when I saw you trying to wash blood from your apron, looking like a wild thing caught in a trap, I remembered my first wife, how she looked the morning I found her." "What was her name?" "Helena." The word carried weight like a prayer. "She was 18 when she died, gentle as spring water, never raised her voice to anyone." "I'm not gentle." Number Joaquin's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile. "You're strong. Strong enough to survive, strong enough to fight back. That's why I knew you'd be good at this life." Understanding passed between them like smoke on still air. Mercy felt the last of her old fears dissolve, replaced by something steadier and more reliable than hope. "The scouting life," she said, "is there room in it for more than professional partnership?" "That depends." Joaquin stepped closer, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "Can you love a man who lives between two worlds? Who'll never be fully accepted by either? Can you love a woman with blood on her hands?" "I already do." The confession hung between them simple as morning light. Mercy reached for his hand, found it warm and steady as everything else about him. "Then we understand each other." "We do." They turned back toward the fort as the first stars appeared overhead. Tomorrow would bring new assignments, new dangers, new country to scout and secure. But tonight there was this two people who'd found each other in the space between one life and another, who'd chosen partnership over safety and honesty over easy lies. At the fort's main gate, Joaquin paused to retrieve something from his saddlebags. The blue cavalry coat, neatly folded, brass buttons polished bright. "You kept it," Mercy observed. "Thought you might want it for cold nights on the trail." She took the coat, held it against her chest. It smelled of sage smoke and leather, of wide country and honest work. When she slipped it on, it fit her shoulders like it was tailored for her frame. "How do I look?" Joaquin studied her with the same careful attention he gave fresh tracks or weather signs. "Like someone who belongs here." "Here?" "With me. With this life." He touched her face gently, fingertips tracing the line of her jaw where Thomas's bruises had finally faded completely. "Like someone who's come home." The church bell in the nearby town of Mesilla rang 10 o'clock, but Mercy barely heard it. She was listening instead to the sound of night birds calling across the desert, to the soft movement of horses in the fort's corrals, to the steady rhythm of Joaquin's breathing as he stood beside her. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. 3 months later, when Maria Santos married Joaquin Santos in the fort's chapel with Colonel Hayes standing as witness, no one questioned her past or asked about family back east. She'd earned her place among the scouts through skill and courage, had proven herself in country that tested everyone equally. The preacher asked if she took this man as her husband, for better or worse, in sickness and health, till death parted them. "I do," she said, and meant every word. When Joaquin kissed his bride, she like first rain after a long dust season, honest as morning light breaking over unmarked territory. Later, as they danced to the post-band's music under a canopy of desert stars, Mercy caught sight of her reflection in the chapel window. The frightened woman who'd knelt by the creek that morning seemed like someone from a half-remembered dream. In her place stood a scout's wife, a woman who could track game and tend wounds, who slept easy under open sky and feared no man's fist. "Any regrets?" Joaquin asked as they swayed to the music. Mercy considered the question seriously. She thought of Thomas Whitfield's grave in the churchyard, back in Silver Creek, marked with a stone that praised his devotion to his beloved wife. She thought of the homestead she'd sold for less than its worth, the life she'd abandoned without looking back. "Only one," she said finally. Joaquin's expression grew concerned. "What's that?" "I wish I'd been brave enough to leave him alive." She smiled up at her husband, this good man who'd offered her partnership instead of protection, respect instead of rescue. Would have saved us both a lot of trouble. Joaquin threw back his head and laughed. A sound like joy made audible. Other couples turned to look, smiling at the happiness that seemed to radiate from the newlyweds like heat from a campfire. "Next time," he said, spinning her under his arm, "we'll do it the easy way." "Next time," Mercy agreed, and stepped into the dance with the confidence of someone who'd found her footing at last. The music played on. and the desert wind carried their laughter out across country vast enough to hold any number of second chances, any number of fresh starts, any number of stories that began with endings and ended with hope. If something in this story touched you, linger with us. We'll handle the rest.